Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Luis Enrique's young and vibrant PSG side are turning heads with their exuberant brand of football. They've already wrapped up the Ligue 1 title with 6 games left to spare, and they face Aston Villa in the Champions League quarter-finals this week. So, is Luis Enrique one of the most underrated coaches of the modern era? And are PSG finally ready to win the Champions League? All right, with us today, we have the Athletic Spanish football writer Dermot Corrigan and French football writer and broadcaster as well, Tom Williams. Right, Tom, talk to us about PSG this season. You know, could they be the first team in the history of French football's top division to go the entire season in the league unbeaten? But also, if no one's watched PSG this season, just how convincing and amazing have they been?
I mean, they've been very impressive. This is not new. PSG dominating Ligue is not new, and there have been seasons where they've dominated Ligue and won it quite comfortably, and have ended up being booed off the pitch at the end of the season because they've fallen short in the Champions League. Things are going well in the Champions League for them this season, so generally the mood around the club is about as positive as it's ever been. But in terms of their domestic domination, it's been remarkable. So they haven't lost a game yet. They are 6 games away from being, or 5 games away from being the first French club to have ever completed the season unbeaten. The team who got closest to that were the great Nantes team of 94-95, who got a couple of games away towards the end of that season. But they've beaten all their nearest rivals, and very convincingly. They beat Monaco home and away. They beat Marseille home and away. They beat Lille home and away. And every time they're scoring a hatful of goals. The only teams they've dropped points against, I think they've twice drawn against Reims, dropped points against Nantes, against Auxerre, and it tends to be the teams who, play quite defensively and deny them space, etc. But every time they've come up against a team, theoretically capable of competing with them, they've generally just blown them away. And playing this style of football that is so impressive, total dominance with the ball, an incredible level of industry without the ball. And as much as we're used to seeing PSG run away with a Ligue 1 title, the fact that they could do the season unbeaten and the fact that they're playing this kind of football means that people are looking at them as, potentially the greatest French club side there's ever been.
Oh, wow. Big praise there. And Dermot, on that style, on Sunday, the Athletic FC Tactics podcast released a video on our YouTube channel breaking down Enrique's tactics at PSG. Please go check it out if you haven't seen it already. Now, that basically noted that Enrique likes his team to play with high intensity. I should say Luis Enrique likes his team to play with high intensity, attacking football. But also, is this a definition of Enrique's teams?
This is the way that Luis Enrique has always wanted to play. Like, he's come through, as a player, he played at Real Madrid, then he played at Barcelona under Johan Cruyff, was really influenced by Cruyff. He was a teammate of Pep Guardiola at Barcelona. And his idea of the game is that high tempo, possession based, high pressing, push the other team back, dominate the game through possession, play in the other team's half, and look to just completely smother the team by dominating possession, scoring lots of goals and winning the game. He did that when he started off tried to do it at Roma, didn't go that well. Then when he came to Celta Vigo in La Liga, he implemented that with a team with no superstars in it, really played really well. That got him the Barcelona job. When he was Barca coach, he had to adjust a little bit because he had Messi, Neymar and Suarez up front. He had a team full of stars who had already won lots of trophies before he took over. So he kind of built on what Guardiola had put in place at Barcelona, made them a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more direct in the way that they played. And then when he went to Spain, it's closer maybe to what he's doing at PSG now, which is he's got a lot of really young players, a lot of people who maybe haven't got to the very top of their careers yet, who are technically really good, who are physically excellent, full of energy, and who will follow the boss's instructions. Luis Enrique likes to be the guy who's the biggest star maybe at the club, the biggest personality at the club, which is more difficult when you have Messi. He had, some run-ins with Messi. It was difficult at Barcelona, that is. It was difficult maybe with Mbappe last season at PSG. They got along, but he was in and out of the team, Mbappe, during the end of time. But this season he has been able to put his print on the PSG team, and it's been fantastic to watch. I haven't seen as much of them as Tom in Ligue 1, but in Champions League, they've put in some really tremendous performances. That first game against Liverpool in Paris, when they were unlucky with the result, but they really steamrolled Liverpool in that game. That's the heights that Luis Enrique team can reach, and when everybody's pulling in the same direction, following his lead, that's what they're capable of.
Well, Tom, I want to talk about the profile of the players that PSG have got right now, away from the Messis, the Neymars, and the Mbappes of this world. And actually, there's a piece by Ali Rampling that she put out on The Athletic after Enrique signed a new contract. And I thought his quote was really interesting from President Nasser Al-Khalifi, basically talking about this current squad. He basically said these announcements are further example of the strong long-term foundations we have established as Paris Saint-Germain, and this is off the back of certain players signing new contracts, based on developing the very best talent who believe in the project, who fight for the shirt, and who place the collective above everything else. That is what we're seeing on the field right now, and that change in strategy seems to be paying dividends.
Oh, completely. And this has been the message for pretty much the last 3 years. You go back to the summer of 2022, Nasser Al-Khalifi gave an interview to Le Parisien newspaper, and he said the bling-bling culture at PSG is over. Okay. And people were like, okay, well, that sounds great, but, you've still got a front three of Messi, Neymar and Mbappe. How does that work? But at the same time, behind the scenes, things are happening. They're building a new training centre. Luis Campos comes in as a sporting advisor that summer. The profile of player who the club is targeting starts to get younger. That summer, Vitinha arrives, Nuno Mendes arrives, and they're starting to move away from the superstar model. Come the end of that season, which ends with another Ligue 1 title, but another disappointment in the Champions League, Messi and Neymar leave, but so do Sergio Ramos, so do Marco Verratti, and the players coming in to replace them are, again, these younger, hungrier players. So this has been a coordinated effort at all levels of the club to move away from the superstars era towards something more sustainable, something a bit more organic. And all of the players who've come in over the last couple of years have generally ticked those boxes. You go back to last summer, João Neves, Desiree Doué, William Pacho, January, Kvisha Kvaratskhelia arrives from Napoli. Players who cost a lot of money. It's not like PSG have been picking up bargains here. They've been paying top dollar for top talent, but they've been targeting players on the way up, rather perhaps than players who weren't, if not on the way down, then players who were already, kind of superstars. And, as Dermot was saying before, it's so important for Luis Enrique as a coach to have buy-in from all of his players. He didn't have total buy-in from Kylian Mbappe, in the sense that Mbappe is a guy who just doesn't really like defending very much, and there was friction about that. And since Mbappe's gone, he's now able to put out an 11, and it doesn't really matter who's in it. He rotates quite a lot, but everyone puts in a shift, and that's what makes PSG such a terrifying prospect. The fact that they are now such a unit, and Luis Enrique's role in that has been enormous. But I think you also need to look at everything that's been put in place around that. This is something that has come, from the top, and I think the decision makers at PSG ultimately got a bit fed up with the superstars. We've put so much money into this club. We've bought all these superstar players. Some of them don't even run around very much, and we're still a laughingstock in the Champions League. And I think that perhaps explains some of the determination we've seen from PSG to head off in this new direction. And so far, at least, it's been an extremely fruitful new direction.
Is it unfair, though, Dermot, to say, that superstar project was a failure? Because, that superstar project still brought in titles. What am I looking at? 11 league titles in 13 seasons. That's a great return for all that. But as Tom was just saying, I guess it's a slight grimace that the Champions League never really came to PSG, because you're having Messi there, you've got Neymar there, you've got Mbappe. These are world-class players, but when it came to the final hurdle, they just seemed to falter when it came to the Champions League.
Yeah, I guess it depends what your aim was. If you wanted to build Paris as a brand, as a club, to build a super club in Paris, which wasn't really there before the Qataris came in, then you do have to go and sign people like like Messi and Ramos and Neymar to build yourself off the pitch, to get the revenues of the club up, to build a top European super club. But you saw the problems with that then when they got to the final stages of the Champions League. The Paris Saint-Germain, lots of times we saw them playing, getting to the final stages of the Champions League, and they would just come up short. They would meet another team which had lots of talent as well, lots of superstars in it, but which were tactically well set up, which were hard-working, which had a better team ethic in them. And Paris Saint-Germain, year after year after year, would get knocked out. And as Tom was saying there, it must have been a little bit embarrassing, because what the owners of Paris Saint-Germain and the president of the club, what they want is to be on those glamorous occasions when the world is watching, for their team to have won. It's no good to be able to steamroll all the opposition in Ligue 1, and even to, maybe for Paris Saint-Germain fans, beating Marseille or beating Monaco in huge games is big for them. But you'd imagine maybe for the very highest level at Paris Saint-Germain, what really counted was the Champions League. And I guess you could say credit to the hierarchy at the club, that they kind of realised that the superstar model wasn't going to work for them, or maybe it was always going to be needed for the first decade of the project, maybe to build to get to a certain level. And only because they did that, they could now take a different approach when they had reached that level. It's a bit harsh on maybe managers like Unai Emery, who is a guy maybe similar to Luis Enrique, who wants buy-in from everybody, who sets up his team, and it is not the ideal manager to have if you have Sergio Ramos and Messi and the guys in the team. But they've been on a learning curve, and they have a lot of money to spend. They've been able to throw, money, millions after millions after millions, in order to get to the stage that they are today. And it does look, from the Liverpool game and from the way things are opening up in the Champions League, maybe for them, that they have a great opportunity to make that final step this year with, it looks like Luis Enrique is the right guy to have in charge players like Vitinha and Dembélé, who, are coming to a good stage in their careers. They're ready maybe to take that step for Paris Saint-Germain, but they still have to go and do it now out on the pitch.
Yeah, it's a really good time to talk about Luis Enrique, Tom, and the work he's been doing there. And Nasser Al-Khelaifi also said, on Luis Enrique, because he's signed a new contract, I am particularly grateful to our coach Luis Enrique, who has driven great progression and cultural change at the club in such a short time. That phrase, cultural change, that's so powerful, because it's some of what Dermot's alluded to and what you've alluded to in what's shifted here and the types of player profiles they've highlighted. How important is that cultural change at PSG, not just for a winning mentality, but what they look to do in the future?
It was vital. And I think the fact that PSG had that superstar era was kind of something they had to do, because they were trying to become one of the biggest clubs in the world, which...
What do you think on a marketing sense, to have more eyes on PSG, raise the profile of the club?
Exactly, and they succeeded in doing that. The branding operation is remarkable. The number of PSG merchandise you see, even just walking around London, you'd think they were the most successful team in all, in the whole world. But also, there's always been a glamour to Paris, as a city, and PSG in their more successful period, you go back to the mid-90s, the George Weah, David Ginola era, they were the glamour side. Ronaldinho a few years later. What's the point in owning a football club like Paris Saint-Germain if you're not going to turn them into this, sort of glittering galaxy of superstars? But ultimately, it got to a point where there were too many superstars, and in modern football, you go back to the Messi, Neymar, Mbappe team, you can't succeed at the highest level if you've got three guys in your team who don't defend. And for a long time, you watched PSG and thought, they have so much in the way of resources and good intentions, but this commitment to superstars is, paradoxically, also the thing that's holding them back. It's giving them this visibility, it's giving them this success, domestically and in marketing terms, but it's also, keeping them where they are in terms of the Champions League. And it needed someone with a big personality like Luis Enrique to be able to embody this change of direction. And I think, one thing that he has been big on is discipline. One of the first things he did when he came in was he introduced a rule that every player in the squad had to physically sign a piece of paper with a pen at the training ground before every training session, whether they were fit to train or not. So that everyone is at least there. Everyone is clocking in at the start of the working
day. Sounds like
day.
turning up at school, doesn't it?
Sounds like turning up at school. Things like that. The way that he's managed certain players. Dermot mentioned the way that he managed Mbappe last season. There were a couple of times where, Mbappe had played pretty well. He scored a hat-trick against Reims, going back sort of the first half of last season. Luis Enrique was asked about his performance and said, actually, I think he can be doing a little bit more. Again, kind of alluding to the lack of off-the-ball work. We saw in the documentary about Luis Enrique that came out a few months ago, the one-on-one video analysis sessions he had with Mbappe. And he tells me, I hear you like Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was the best player on the team, but he was also the best defender on the team. Yeah. That's what you need to do. Back end of last season, once Mbappe makes it known, albeit not publicly, that he's leaving, Luis Enrique starts putting him on the bench, taking him out of the team. I need to prepare the team for next season, etc., etc. Ousmane Dembélé this season, really interesting case study in terms of man management. Turns up late for a training session prior to the Arsenal game. There might have been a few, slightly heated conversations with Luis Enrique as well, and he's dropped for the Arsenal game, gets sent off slightly needlessly in the defeat at Bayern Munich, spends a couple of games on the bench in Ligue, and then ends up finding this career-defining burst of form in a new false nine role that Luis Enrique has basically designed for him. So you've got the kind of discipline side, and then on the playing side, he has just giving this team a new identity, but an identity that is dependent on PSG playing as a team, as an 11, rather than, 8 plus 3 superstars or, 7 plus 4 superstars or whatever. So that's where the sort of the cultural change has come from. And yeah, Luis Enrique's role in that has been enormously significant.
Yeah, just on the subject of Luis Enrique, Dermot, and please come in on this, Tom. Does he get the respect he deserves? You look at what he did at Barcelona, league titles, the domestic treble, Champions League, also the Spanish national team, Euro semi-finals in 2021. When we say Pep Guardiola, we talk about Ancelotti, we talk about pedigree. Sometimes the name Luis Enrique isn't part of that conversation.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that Luis Enrique has got the respect or maybe the job offers that he could have got in different circumstances. He's a very interesting character, Luis Enrique. He's very charismatic. He's very sure of himself. He's doesn't care too much about the media. He doesn't go to he doesn't look to big himself up that much in the media. He doesn't like journalists, I think it's fair to say. He's very, and the way that things happen in Spain, because of the way he left Real Madrid to join Barcelona, this is back in the 1990s, but it was a huge deal here in Spain, and he's not liked around Real Madrid. And he's kind of leaned into that. He likes kind of having being the villain, being the guy that people like to hate around Real Madrid. Then when he was Spain coach, he had a really awkward relationship with the media. Go to some of the press conferences, he would call people out, journalists who he thought were like Real Madrid backing journalists who were getting on his back, and there were people waiting for him to fail at Spain. He didn't have a great generation of players when he was Spain coach, but he got them to the Euros, and they were very unlucky enough to win that Euros. I think they were the best team at Euro 2020 when it was played in 2021. Italy beat them. Italy were kind of more mature, maybe more professional about what they did, but Spain played the best football. It was a really young, exciting team, and they were unlucky enough to win it. Then it was a disaster at the World Cup. Rubiales was in all kinds of things went wrong with Spain. But I was surprised that a big Premier League club didn't come in for Luis Enrique along the way, because you can see the way he's been able to stamp his impact on Paris, even to the fact that the president of the club is so complimentary towards him, that he has, because of the ego that he has and because of the charisma that he has, he's a guy who could go into, well, I think anyway, could go into a club like Man United or Chelsea, where there's a lot of structural issues. They need somebody to tell the owners when to take a step back, to have the personality to be able to do that, to tell big name players that you're out of there, that, because he was a big name player himself. He's a guy who won the Champions League as a player. He's a huge name in Spanish football even before he became a coach, and he has the ego to go with that
Yeah, it's the issue here that he came after Pep Guardiola at Barcelona. Tom.
Completely. I think an awful lot of it comes down to timing. For all the success he achieved at Barcelona, and he's the guy who won their first treble. People look at that and think, oh well, it was Guardiola's team, so he picked up the pieces. He played a similar kind of football, but in actual fact, you look at the team that won the treble, and they were a much more vertical team than Guardiola's great Barcelona side. It wasn't that he just turned up. Guardiola left the keys in the ignition and he, just kind of got the thing going again. He found a way to get the very best out of that, that remarkable Messi, Neymar, Suarez front three. And then with Spain, we'd got so used to seeing Spain do well at major tournaments that his achievements don't seem all that impressive. But in the grand sweep of the history of the Spanish national team, he's one of their most successful coaches. But because he comes after the kind of high point of the tiki-taka era, and he didn't win a major trophy, people look back at his time as Spain coach as if it was, only moderately successful. I think what will change for him is if he wins the Champions League somewhere else. If he wins the Champions League with PSG, having been the figurehead of this, very successful cultural reset, then I think he'll start to be talked about as one of the great coaches of his generation, because he'll have 2 Champions Leagues under his belt as a coach to go with one that he won as a player. And then perhaps we might start seeing his name being linked with, some of the big jobs. And I think, clearly being PSG coach gives a coach enormous advantages in terms of the quality of the infrastructures, in terms of the quality of the playing squad. But because so many PSG coaches have tried to do something similar and failed, if he's the first one to kind of pull off a Champions League win, I think that'll send his profile soaring.
Yeah, I was interested in what Dermot said about those Premier League jobs, because, obviously the profiles of the teams Lopetegui coached were probably not like the Manchester United of this world or whatnot, Wolves and West Ham, but why wouldn't he not have been in that conversation, to take those teams to the very top in a similar way that, Unai Emery's gone to Aston Villa to try and take them to the very top? Is that surprising for you?
Yeah, completely. I think sometimes when a coach who has worked in club football takes on a national team job, they almost kind of drift out of the conversation a little bit when it comes to club jobs. I think there's a feeling because Luis Enrique is such a Cruyff disciple, and there was an interesting sort of exchange of views when they came up against Barcelona in the Champions League last season, when he was asked whether he or Xavi, who was then Barcelona coach, best represented the kind of Cruyffian ideals in terms of his football. He said straight away, the guy asking the question hadn't even finished his sentence. He was like, It's me. Look at the stats. It's me. And maybe, in the recent evolution of elite level European football, there's been a feeling that we've kind of moved beyond the kind of possession focused approach. The kind of leading coaches these days, it tends to be a lot more about counter pressing, about hybrid styles. And Luis Enrique is a bit of a throwback in the sense that he wants total control. He wants 100% possession. And so his team, when they have the ball, are extremely carefully organised, and his players are drilled to within an inch of their lives as to what they can and can't do when they have the ball. And then when they lose it, they just become this absolute animal, when it comes to winning it back. And so it's if you think about the various different sort of tactical branches of the great football tactics family tree, like his branch he branches off from Cruyff, he branches off from Guardiola, and he has PSG's counter pressing is very minutely organised as well, and very effective. But there is something that, I don't know, perhaps there's something in his approach that might have seemed slightly countercultural in recent years, and perhaps recruiters at big Premier League clubs wonder whether it's possible to play that kind of football in the Premier League. Obviously, we saw that Guardiola succeeded,
right?
But he had to make a few adjustments as well. But it will be interesting to see. I guess we are dependent on seeing where PSG end up in the Champions League this season. But if they have a successful tournament, it'll be interesting to see what kind of opportunities present themselves to Luis Enrique, if indeed he's interested in leaving.
All right, Tom, look, while PSG might not have a superstar team at this moment in time, there's plenty of very, very exciting individuals. I want to talk about one man, Ousmane Dembélé. Oh, man. This guy lights my heart up when it comes to football. 32 goals this season, 7 assists. I mean, he didn't start off that well at PSG, but for some reason, at some point, something's clicked with this guy and he is producing amazing football. Why is it happening?
I think a lot of it is to do with the position he's playing in. Luis Enrique had occasionally tested him in this sort of central striking role, this false nine role last season. And you saw what he was capable of bringing to the table when he plays more centrally, because he's an incredible dribbler, almost impossibly two-footed, very quick. And the thing that has been kind of held against him quite a lot in his career is his decision-making, is his lucidity in the final third. And you go back to the start of this season and Luis Enrique was determined to play without a recognised centre-forward. And you look back at PSG's games in the league phase and he gave everyone a go at playing in that false nine role. He tried Marco Asensio, he tried Desiree Doué, he tried Lee Kang-in. I don't think he'd ever played in that kind of position before. And none of them really worked. And it was only really around the turn of the year that he gave, Dembélé more of a run out in that position. And suddenly it clicked. And I think because, the work that Luis Enrique has been doing, on team structure and build-up play and people's roles in the team, it meant that, Dembélé was slotting into a really well-oiled machine that creates an awful lot of chances. And he said himself, he's been asked to explain where this sudden, kind of cold-blooded ruthlessness in front of goal has come from. And he said, well, look, I've been a winger most of my career. I get the ball up on the right, I beat a couple of men, I try and get a shot away, and I'm knackered. I can't do it, I'm too tired. Whereas now, he's kind of playing as a centre-forward a lot of the time, and he's got these incredible creators all around him. Bradley Barcola, Kvaratskhelia, Doué, Neves, Vitinha. So the chances arrive, and rather than having to get past a couple of players and then get a shot away, he's very often one-on-one with the goalkeeper, or he's coming onto a cross at the back post, and he's actually finding it quite easy. And he's obviously done work on his finishing. He's obviously learnt to be a little bit more cool-headed. So I think it's a convergence of various different factors. And a really important element to his game as well is his off-the-ball work. The amount of work he puts in to try and win the ball back. He's the guy leading the press. He's always had these, remarkable physical qualities. And I think in Luis Enrique and in the kind of makeup of this particular iteration of PSG, he's found the perfect match for his attributes as a footballer.
For sure. Dermot, I know you'd have seen him at Barcelona. That, 135 million euros, I think it was in 2017. It's still one of the highest transfer fees ever paid for a player. His Barcelona career was so interesting because there were flashes of brilliance there. You remember him at Dortmund as well, coming from there. There were beautiful flashes of brilliance. But I wonder whether, we've obviously spoken about how much of a mess Barcelona can be in the background as much as they do produce great players at the academy. But there's a structure at Dortmund that really works well with players like him. There's also now a structure with a great coach at PSG who knows what he wants and can deliver that to a player that I would say probably looked a bit lost for a few years. Do you think that has really contributed, Luis Enrique, a structure at PSG, to what we are seeing now with Dembélé and hopefully him fulfilling that potential we all thought he'd be able to achieve? Yeah,
100%. Like that, the word lost there, it is pretty perfect for what happened to him at Barcelona, because he did have tremendous talent. And as Tom said, like two-footed, incredible, like very few players we've seen it in history with that kind of quality in both feet. He's super fast. But it was just a feeling that at Barcelona, and a lot of people around the club, especially in the media and even some people inside the club, thought he just didn't understand what Barcelona was about, how Barcelona were supposed to play, the kind of traditional way that Barca play. But he also had Messi in the team as well, and everything had to go through Messi. At that stage, it was kind of late. Messi was still brilliant, but it was still late era Messi, so everybody in the team had to put their kind of talents to serve Dembélé. And Dembélé was kind of seen as a strange enough guy who didn't fit with the Catalan crew who were there. And then for a lot of the time at Barcelona, they just wanted to get his wages off the wage bill. They tried to force him out of Barcelona. The sporting director, Mateo Alman, went on the TV saying, we're not going to play him anymore. Xavi actually defended him, brought him back into the team. But there was all that kind of stuff going on. And Dembélé he's a laid back character. He's not the most plugged in maybe to what's going on sometimes around the club. Not just because he doesn't care that much. I think just from talking to people who know him over the years, he's a kind of a laid back guy. He loves football. He's a student of football, plays football manager games, so he knows what's going on in the team. But when he wasn't the central character, or when he didn't feel that he had the confidence of the people around him, he didn't feel important in the project, maybe he let himself go a little bit and he wasn't as plugged in as he should be. Even last season, Mbappe was the main man in the team, and Dembélé wasn't doing, didn't have that kind of sense that it's really important what I do. I'm the guy who can do this. And Luis Enrique has got inside his head. They've had their fallings out, as well as Tom was saying earlier on. He's been in and out of the team maybe earlier on in the season. But Luis Enrique has got him plugged in completely. Has got him full of confidence, got him humming, buzzing. And the talent has always been there. And some of the goals he scored have been incredible. Just so he makes it look so easy, kind of. He's that elastic kind of style. He's a great player to watch. He slides the ball into the net as well sometimes. And I'm happy for him because he went through a difficult time, Barcelona. He was kind of scapegoated for some of the things that went wrong. It wasn't his fault that the club decided to spend so much on him. It wasn't his fault that they then wanted to get rid of him because they didn't think he was worth the wages, but it's come good for him this season. And as I say, the way that Luis Enrique has got on his wavelength, has got him hooked into the team, has found a position that works for him as well, and has got him working really hard for the team, has been, again, great managerial work by Luis Enrique.
Yeah, can we just have a little shout out to the recruitment at PSG, Tom? Vitinha, João Neves, two unbelievable midfielders, great scouting. I know they paid money for them, but I mean, just look at, Verratti leaving, and you're looking at who might be a successor to Verratti, who's stalwart at that club for so many years. And Vitinha's just been so good, stylish, intricate, and then João Neves just offers his energy that's just like insufferable sometimes. I mean, that is great recruitment for this team.
Yeah, I think Vitinha's journey in particular is really interesting because he arrived in the summer of 2022. So the internal messaging was we're kind of moving away from the superstar era towards something more sustainable. But at this point, the superstars are all still there, and he has to try and find his place in the changing room. Having been at Porto, having had an unsuccessful loan spell at Wolves, didn't really have much status in the game at this point. And I think he struggled with that. There was a story that came out in the French media that at some point in a training session, Messi had turned to him and said, "You're not very good." Like, he was disappointed in his level, had kind of given him a bit of a dressing down. And yet he is now one of the figureheads. And initially he was kind of playing alongside Marco Verratti. But then what happened towards the end of last season was Luis Enrique started using him as a number 6, as the guy who anchors the midfield. And physically, he has none of the characteristics that you'd associate with a number 6, particularly in terms of the sort of the recent Spanish tradition. You think about Sergio Busquets, Rodri. These are tall players, generally able to look after themselves physically. Rodri in particular. Whereas Vitinha's this little skinny guy, not great in the air, but incredible work rate, and he's very often the guy who gets PSG going. He drops into the defensive line to pick up the ball. And whereas Verratti was extremely good at receiving the ball with his back to goal, and holding off players and sort of wriggling away from them, Vitinha really likes receiving the ball and facing the play. And his ability to do that, the risks that he occasionally takes, wriggling between challenges on the edge of the box, but knowing that if he does that, the first line of the opposition press has been broken and they're going to be away. That's been a key element to the way that PSG play under Luis Enrique. And then João Neves, a similar kind of player, a little Portuguese midfielder. And I think this is a sign of the extent to which Luis Campos and Luis Enrique have been in lockstep. I think a lot of clubs would have thought, one little Portuguese guy who can be knocked off the ball by anyone over sort of 5'10" is a risk in itself. Having two of them feels potentially, slightly careless, but their industry, their quality on the ball has just taken PSG to the next level. And I think it's a sign of the thinking being aligned, of of the need to have this level of sort of technical mastery in that area of the pitch. And I think there will have been reservations at PSG about associating the two of them in that part of the pitch. But you look at the way that they blew Liverpool out of the water, like one of the most impressive midfield trios in European football this season. Fabian Ruiz as well plays an enormously important role. Someone who is physically a little bit more imposing. But yeah, it's been a massive part of this new way of playing that PSG have happened upon, and I think it helps that they're so great to watch. I think that's one of the reasons why people are perhaps sort of softening with regard to the way they think about PSG. I mean, PSG as a club may never be super popular, but it's very difficult not to enjoy watching this team at least.
No, you're spot on. You took the words right out of my mouth, because I was going to say, Dermot, dare I say, are we softening from a neutral perspective to PSG? They've got some likable characters. Arne Slot recently said, this is one of the wealthiest teams in the world, and we can't get away from that. But in terms of recruitment, has this recruitment allowed the neutral fan to think, oh, I quite like PSG now. This is fun to watch. Dembélé, Vitinha, João, Neves.
Yeah, I think so. And Vitinha, it's just been a tremendous player and just tremendously exciting to watch. Even a couple of years ago when the team weren't as well put together as they are now. Just what little guy gets on the ball, seems to be everywhere, popping up all over the field, but super intelligent in how he uses the ball, how he is always available for teammates when they're in trouble. He's there to receive the ball, to get them out of trouble, to move the ball onto another part of the pitch where there is space. And like what Tom was saying there about Rodri and Busquets, I take it that Vitinha is not as tall as they are, but he's very similar to Busquets in the way that he plays. The role he plays for PSG is very similar to how late era Busquets played in that Spain team, that everything goes through him, that he's it's kind of like an umbrella, and he's the at the point of the umbrella, especially off the ball as well. When they press up the pitch and want to pin a team back in, he's the guy who takes super risks. He's supposed to be the deepest guy in midfield, but sometimes he's 30 yards from goal, and he knows. Used to especially happen with Busquets, but I think Vitinha has that as well, that he knows where the danger is going to be, can read what the opposition team are going to do, maybe because he's been talking to Luis Enrique beforehand and they've kind of worked out how we're going to press this team, how we're going to stop them, and they win the ball back and he moves it very quickly. And it's been, it wasn't difficult to go, okay, if you're at PSG and you're a sporting director, to say, okay, we have the money, we'll get Messi when he's going to leave Barcelona, or we'll get Sergio Ramos. We'll pick up these big name players and we'll sign them. But signing Vitinha, Nuno Mendes as well at left back, some of the players that they've picked up from leagues, it wasn't that they had to fight off Real Madrid to get them, or United and Chelsea were in for them as well. They have done some very clever recruitment.
All right, let's move on. Coming up, we'll talk PSG's Champions League hopes. Tom, there's some box office ties in this round of the Champions League. And actually, I think this one is also going to be box office. For tactical nouns of two managers really, really good at getting the best out of their teams. But, going into this tournament, I don't know if many people would have seen PSG as favourites to win the Champions League. And PSG are still looking for a Champions League to say they are one of the best teams in Europe. Is this the season for them?
It could well be. You look at some of the other usual candidates, and Manchester City having this very strange season have fallen by the wayside. Liverpool looked like the best team in Europe, and PSG have already beaten them. Real Madrid are not exactly firing on all cylinders. Not that has ever stopped them from winning the Champions League in the past.
Yeah.
Barcelona clearly an exceptional team to watch. Are they the finished article yet? Perhaps not. So it feels like there's an opportunity here for PSG to win the Champions League. I think in terms of performance level, what they showed over two legs against Liverpool, okay, they only beat them on penalties. But, if it was a boxing match and it had gone to points, there would have been no contest whatsoever. And I think that's made the whole sort of footballing continent sit up and take notice. The messaging around the Champions League from PSG is interesting, though, because during this kind of period of cultural recalibration, the message has been, it's not an obsession anymore. we were wrong to make it an obsession in the first place. When the Qataris bought PSG in 2011, Nasser Al-Khelaifi said, we're going to win it in 5 years. That's the goal. And so straight away you have this idea that if PSG don't win the Champions League, the whole thing has been a failure. And the messaging the last couple of years has been, it's about more than that. You know, our success as a club and our identity as an institution doesn't live or die on what happens in the Champions League. And Al-Khelaifi has been saying that, you know, pretty regularly. Every time he's asked the question, you know, is this the season? Do you have to win it this season? He says no. You know, we might win it this season. We might win it next season. Maybe it'll take us 8 years. You know, maybe we won't get there, but we're on a different kind of journey. But the whole of the football world is saying, well, hang on, this looks like it might be the season. And I think, and you know, you can make a comparison here with Manchester City. The football world will not judge this PSG era, the Qatari era at PSG, as a success until they win the Champions League. So the messaging might all be, well, we don't have to win the Champions League, it's not obsession anymore, blah, blah, blah. It would be enormous. I mean, it would kind of retrospectively validate all the kind of the ups and downs, the upheaval, the superstars, the penalty controversies, the warring egos. If they finally lift that Champions League trophy in Munich at the end of the season, then they can kind of turn around and say, well, look, we've kind of got to where we were trying to get to. So it does feel like they've got a very good opportunity, and it would be a transformative thing for the club if this were to finally be the season when they win it.
Yeah, for sure.
They're fooling nobody with that messaging. Tom. I think
that's some reverse psychology to me, though. I'm just saying.
We don't want to. It doesn't really matter if we win the Champions League or not. For Luis Enrique to if they do go on and win it, and they have beaten Pep Guardiola's Man City in the group stage, they've knocked out Liverpool. To beat Emery, they will possibly have to beat Real Madrid, which for Luis Enrique to go to Real Madrid and win will be a huge thing. And then they could get Barcelona in the final, where he'll be going back to his old club or up against his old club. For him personally, they're the type of challenges that I'm sure he's looked at it. I'm sure that motivates him, that extra motivates him to go along and do it. And I don't know it's very open. It's the most open Champions League maybe in a good while. It's hard to pick who's going to win, but PSG have a great chance. And there's a lot of people, as we were saying before, who are now cheering for them, who wouldn't have been in previous years.
Yeah, I mean, so much to look forward to. Bayern, Inter, Arsenal, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Dortmund, and of course PSG versus Aston Villa. Wow. Gents, let's end it there. Tom, Dermot, thank you so much for your time. And also thank you guys for watching as well. And don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel and leave us a cheeky comment as well with your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. We are back soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.